We will start with stored procedures overview. So what is a stored procedure? Well, let's say you have a client application on the left side and your database server, your DB2 server on the right side. Now you can develop an application where you issue SQL. Let's say SQL number want to go to the server, DB2 server, it does the processing, then it sends the result back to the client. Then SQL number 2 go to the server, return, and then the client application issues SQL number 3 goes to the server and returns, and so on and so on, right? But the problem here, as you can see, is the traffic on the network. There is too much traffic on the network using these processes. Now what you'll do is you could, instead of putting all of the SQL statements on the client application, you can move them and store them as a stored procedure in the DB2 server. So as you can see, we created a stored procedure called myproc where it has all the SQL statements that I want to execute. Then I call the procedure using the call statement from the client application, and then I will return or I will get back the results. And as you can see, there is a lot less traffic if we have this method. So stored procedures are very good for performance, especially when you work on a network, and there are also because all the logic is centralized on the database server. So that potentially there could be another client application that connects to the same database, and that can reuse the same stored procedure for that other application. Now stored procedures can be created in several languages. They could be created using SQL, PLC, C++, Java, COBOL, CLR, OLE, etc., etc. And the one we are using in these e-learning sessions, or the one covered in this particular presentation, is going to be SQLPL, and we choose SQLPL because it's the easiest one to learn. It's very easy to learn. It's very good in terms of performance. Okay, so moving on to the next section, we are going to talk about SQLPL stored procedures basics. So you can create a stored procedure from the command editor or from IBM Data Studio. Let me show you very quickly how you can create it from the command editor. So from here, you first have to be connected to a database. In this case, I am already database. Why you need to be connected? Because a stored procedure is an object that belongs to or is a part of database. So you must be connected because you want to create a stored procedure inside this database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create stored procedure P1. I'll stay begin end. So this is basically creating a stored procedure called P1, and it does not do anything, okay? And I'm going to execute, but it's just to show you that I can successfully create a stored procedure from the command editor. Let me give you some very basic description of the structure of SQLPL stored procedure. So first, you have to start the command with create procedure, the name of the procedure, and some optional parameters. The parameters are language SQL. So here, if you are using SQLPL, you have to use language SQL. If you are using C or Java for application, you have to put language C or language Java, etc., etc. Results sets, you need to add this clause or this optional attribute if you are returning a cursor or a result set. We'll provide an example for this later on. As for specific, that means you are giving a stored procedure a unique name, right? Remember that in DB2 you can overload the stored procedures. So for example, you could do something like this. Let me just go to the end of this example. You could do create procedure, and then you can say P1, and then you can say parameter 2, etc., etc. Let's say parameter 1, parameter 2, all the way to parameter 1000, okay? And then you can also create another procedure that has the same name but only takes one parameter, okay? Now if you want to draw procedure P1 that has 1000 parameters, the only way that DB2 will know that's the one you want to drop is by issuing a drop procedure, and then you have to specify P1 and all the parameters, right? So that DB2 knows that's the procedure that you want to drop and not the other one. And again, this is called overloading, and it's just computer science concept. And instead of in this case dropping this procedure where you have to specify maybe the entire all the parameters you could if you had provided specific as part of the name. So going back to the presentation, if you use this as specific as part of the attributes when you define the procedure, that will give the procedure a unique name. And because this procedure a unique name, when you want to drop it, you can simply drop specific and then the procedure name that you provided, and that's so basically that's the one use of this. Specific keyword. Continuing with some basics with respect to stored procedures, if you want to put parameters, you can put, or there are three types of input and output parameters. There is an input which is specified with in keyword, there is an output parameter specified with out, and there is an input and output procedure specified with in out. Okay, and all of these stored procedures are called using the call statement. Now if you want to put some comments on the stored procedure, SQL stored procedures, you can use two dashes as shown in this first example, or you can use the slash asterisk asterisk slash, which is similar to the C language. For statements that are part of the logic of the stored procedure, if you put the begin and end, that will be a compound statement, and you can optionally put atomic, which means everything will be treated as one single statement. So that it means for the particular things fails within the begin atomic, then everything fails, and you have to follow this order. So you have to follow this. It's like a procedural language, so you have to specify all the declarations at the beginning and then the logic. To declare a variable is very simple. You just use the declare statement and you just put declare the variable name, the data type, and you can put a default value if the default value is null. So here are some examples. Declare variable name temp1, and this is small int with a default value of 0. To assign a value to a variable, you use set, like here set total equals 100, or you can also use values 100 into the variable total. Here for example, you can do set total equals to select a statement, but you have to make sure that this is select statement returns only one value, because total it's a variable that accepts only one value. If you were to return many variables or many columns or rows, then you probably have to define a cursor. And there is another example where we just setting the variable school to current schema. This is a particular or special register, and there are different special register in DB2 like current time, current timestamp, current date, etc. etc. Cursors are basically a result set. Basically, it's when you are working with not only one value but maybe a bunch of rows and columns, then you would be basically declaring first a cursor like this with syntax. You say declare cursor name cursor with return. So whatever, I'll explain this in a few minutes, and then the cursor is based on a select statement. Okay, then what you do once you declare the cursor, normally you will open the cursor, then normally you will create a loop and you would fetch each row from that cursor within the loop and process the information until you run out of rows. And then in the end, normally you will want to close a cursor because you want to basically release memory. Now with is here with return, what that means is you can put there either with return to client or with return to caller. So what that means is the cursor can return directly to the client or the caller. Let me give you an example of that. Let's say you have your client application here, and your client application is calling stored procedure number 1. Stored procedure number 1 is calling stored procedure number 2, which is calling stored procedure number 3. Okay, now let's say stored procedure number 3 is the one that has the cursor, and then if it says with return to client, then it means it will return all the way to the client application. If it says with return to caller, then it means it just returned to sp2, which was the stored procedure that called sp3. So that's basically what client and caller mean. Okay, next you have another quick lab for you to try, where you have this other stored procedure, and actually I'm not going to show you this because it's the same idea. It's a stored procedure are using IBM Data Studio, then the IBM Data Studio will be the client itself, and then in this cursor I'm selecting these three columns from stuff, open the cursor. So that's always the case when you define a cursor and you want to return the cursor to the caller to the client at the end of the stored procedure. You will open the cursor, and that would mean you return the cursor to the caller or the client. And as I said before, you need to specify dynamic result sets and the number result sets, which is pretty much the same thing in this example that you are returning back. So don't forget it. You have the cursor and you open the cursor. Sets 2. Okay, moving on, we have now the concept of SQL code and SQL state. There are two special variables, and you need to, even though they're special, you will still need to declare them within an SQL stored procedure, and you have to declare as shown here. SQL state as char5 SQL code is an integer, and every time you perform an SQL operation, select, insert, update, etc., the SQL code variable will be set, and it will be set to 0 if it's successful operation. If it's greater than 0, means that's it successfully with running, and less than 0 and it's unsuccessful, and 100 if there is no data found. Right, so for example 100 is what you will use cursor. So you are working on a cursor with a cursor, and taken you are looping on that cursor, and you are fetching the rows from the loop. In order to end that loop, what you will do is you can put a condition where you set the SQL code is equal to 100. So you say when SQL code equals 100, then the loop ends. Okay, so that's a typical example of when SQL code equals 100 will be used. SQL state provides similar information as SQL code, but it's not as particular as SQL code. SQL state is normally more a standard across different database vendors. So Oracle SQL may have the same SQL state, but it provides a more generic message, while SQL code is more specific to DB2 in this case. Okay, so moving on to the last section on this presentation, how do you call stored procedure? Well, I already show you how you can call stored procedure. For example, from the command line or command editor, you can use the call statement, right? And you can think about the command editor as a Java application. Now, if you want to call a stored procedure from your application, it depends on the syntax of the programming language which you are using. For example, if you are using CLI stands for call level interface, and it's basically the IBM version of ODBC. Anyway, if you are using ODBC, and here for example you have to put the call statement, and in this example median result set, that's the name of the stored procedure, and then you have to assign it to this S statement variable, and you have to prepare the variable, etc., bind the parameter, etc. So depending different syntax, and you can look at more details about this particular example from this directory. This I will show you later. On where this directory is, but if you install DB2, it will be in this spot. If it is your Visual Basic .NET application, then the same thing. You have to declare the name of the procedure as a string. This is the name of the procedure in this example, and then you have to follow basically the syntax of Visual Basic .NET for calling this procedure. The same thing with Java. You have to prepare to call. You have to register the out parameters. So these are out